Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting story. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story. Alright, Boonies, let's rune. There's Aisha, there's Sandra, there's A&M, Mayhem, Phoenix, there's Resin, there's Jocelyn, there's Louisiana, Kaylee, there's Eddie, Cruising is Fun, Sheena, there's Rooks, there's Ben, there's Tay Weezing, there's Yojin. I apologize, I'm probably not pronouncing any of that right. And boys, there's Scott. There's Cinephile. Oh, it's gonna be the Rooks. Alright, it's kicking it with the Rooks. This is a big family, and they love travel, cruising, road trips, hotels, and of course chaos. We'd love to see a lot of family videos from them. Here's one of them traveling a couple months ago. Here's some shorts, Easter eggs. I think those might be those bath bombs, or they're chalk or something. And then of course their lies. They don't post as often as they used to, but that's because they have a little one. And little ones are chaotic, but they are a fun group to watch when they're on. So check them out. Like, share, comment. Happy Easter. Happy April Fool's Day. And we still have a surprise coming, if I can get around to it. I'm a little busy today, but I'm working on it. All right. First thing is, Happy April Fool's Day. For today's Wayback history, I'm going to do the history lesson. Yep. Goodbye. A short history.
Very short history. Anyway, here's Sue's phone. Go ahead. It's fun. Come on, everybody have to have try. Come on, laugh. Come on, type in the comments. Ha 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 ha.
Pretend we're funny.
We try very hard. Usually not a lot, but we try. But today, for the history, for all the fun, for the knowledge, for the guessworks, when Sue gave me this list of assorted odds and ends and odds, yeah, April Fool's Day, April 1st, some of these inventions that they came up with, you're like, didn't you guys look at the calendar?
Nope.
It's like my mom and dad. They got married on Friday the 13th. Hello? Of course, it worked out well for them, and it's been working out pretty good for us too. But the one thing that kind of stuck out on my mind when I was going through the happy list was the actual patent that was put down for radar. And the honest thing of it is, how do you... I imagine there was a lot of paperwork that had to go through the patent office for the idea of the first radar. Because, first of all, the initial original radar that they wanted to use would have been for, either protection against fog, makes sense, or to detect other ships. Again, useful. Now, interestingly enough, the first people that started working with experiments in radar was a fellow by the name of Heinrich Hertz in late 19th century. That showed that radio waves were reflected by metallic objects. possibility that's suggested in James Clerk Maxwell's seminal work on electromagnetism. However, it wasn't until the early 20th century that systems were able to use these principles were becoming widely available, and it was German inventor Christian Holzmeier who first used them to build a simple ship detection device intended to help avoid collisions in fog. The Reichspatent number 165546 in 1904. Well, true radar, which provided directional and ranging information, such as the British Chain Home early warning system, were developed over the next 2 decades. I've seen this in a couple different programs in the Discovery Channel, and what was crazy is some of the first methods that they tried, granted while they were primitive, they worked. They had people that were using listening cones, and they would sit out on the coast and they would try to listen for aircraft motors, or they would sometimes try to use it as sounding so they could tell how far away a ship was. Some worked, some didn't, and of course the same problem you've got with anything. You can't really use a listening device or some of these inventions in cloudy, foggy conditions. Just didn't work. Now, the development of these systems, able to produce short pulses of radio energy, was the key advance that allowed modern radar systems to come into existence. By timing the pulse of an oscilloscope, the range could be determined and the direction of the antenna revealed the angular location of the targets. The two combined would produce a fix locating the target relative to the antenna. Well, during the 1934 to 1939 period, 8 nations developed independently and in great secrecy systems of this type. The U.S., the United Kingdom, Germany, the USSR, Japan, Netherlands, France, and even Italy got in on it. In addition, Britain shared their information with the U.S. and 4 Commonwealth countries, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and South Africa. And these countries also developed their own radar systems. During the war, Hungary was added to the list, and the term radar was coined in 1939 by the United States Signal Corps as it worked on these systems for the Navy. Okay, class, who can actually tell me what radar stands for?
Run at dumb. That's what's swimming. Get something this for submarines.
Royal Aardvark Detection. No, it stands for Radio Detection and Ranging. So it kind of fits into the club, but it's still fun. Progress during the war and was rapid and for great importance. Probably was one of the decisive factors for the victory of the Allies. A key development was the magnetron in the UK, which allowed for the creation of a relatively small systems with sub-meter resolution. By the end of hostilities, Britain, Germany, and the United States, the USSR, and Japan had a wide variety of land and sea-based radar, as well as small airborne systems. After the war, radar use was widened to numerous fields, including civil aviation, marine navigation, radar guns for police, meteorology, and medicine. Now, the meteorology aspect I read one time, and it was kind of fascinating, especially out here in the plains. Once you get past the Black Hills, you got wide open plains for quite a ways. And we have what we call affectionately the big golf ball. It sits out by New Underwood. And early primitive radars, you could see the front, you could see big billowy clouds, and for the most part, people were kind of, they knew, chance of rain, maybe a thunderstorm, but that was about it. They didn't have a lot of understanding about what was going on inside these big clouds. Well, another point where the military and civilian life get mixed into each other. There was a pilot one time And I guess he was the third pilot out of 4 that this happened to. He had to abandon his plane and parachuted down into this wall cloud. And oh man, it was a roller coaster, because the wind would pick him up, it would shoot him up into the air, he'd get dropped back down into the mess, he'd get hit by hailstones all over the place, he'd get shot back up into the air. It actually took him over an hour to finally reach the ground, because he kept getting tossed into the air. By the time he got to the ground, he was almost cased in ice. He was black and blue. His eardrums had ruptured. They were like, "You're lucky you're still alive, dude." Well, not only was the military interested in what the heck happened to him, so were the meteorologists, because they had no idea what it was like inside some of these cells. Every once in a while, if they had a good storm and somebody was creative, they might be able to launch a balloon and hope that the balloon didn't get hit by lightning or knocked out of the sky by the wind or any number of things. But with the radar, now they would have an idea, if this cell looks like this particular cloud cell, we know that, we should start warning people about things like tornadoes.
No.
Heaven forbid.
Why would you want to do that?
Oh, I don't know. Keep people alive.
No.
Tell them to get in their root cellars. Also, key developments in the post-war period included the traveling wave tube as ways to produce large quantities of coherent microwaves, the development of signal delay systems that led to phased array radars, and ever-increasing frequencies that allow higher resolutions, increases in signal processing capability due to the introduction of solid-state computers, has also had a large impact on radar use. Now, the place of radar in the larger story of science and technology is argued differently by different authors. On one hand, radar contributed very little to theory, which was largely known since the days of Maxwell and Hertz. Therefore, radar did not advance science, but was instead a matter of technology and engineering. Marcus Ponti, one of the developers of radar in France, states, "The fundamental principles of the radar belongs to the common patrimony of the physicists. After all, what is left to the real credit of the technicians is measured in the effective realization of operational materials."
What does that mean?
Basically, you shouldn't be so braggart about it. It basically, we already have the knowledge, we just perfected it. Now, others will point out the immense practical consequences of the development of radar. Far more than the atomic bomb, radar contributed to the Allied victory in World War II. Robert Baderi states that it was also the precursor of much modern technology, from a review in his book. Radar had been the root of wide-range achievements since the war, producing a veritable family tree of modern technologies. Because of radar, astronomers can map the contours of far-off planets, physicians can see the images of internal organs, meteorologists can measure rain falling in distant places, air travel is hundreds of miles safer than travel by road, long-distance telephone calls are cheaper than postage, computers have become ubiquitous, and ordinary people can cook their daily dinners in time between sitcoms with what used to be called a radar range. Microwaves, nuke food. In later years, the radars was used in scientific instruments like weather radar and radar astronomy. Now, the who's who of this club.
Bob and Fred.
Exactly. Don't forget George.
I don't know.
Heinrich Hertz. In 1886 to 1888, the German physicist conducted a series of experiments that proved the existence of electromagnetic waves, including radio waves, predicted the equations developed in 1862 to 1864 by a Scottish physicist, James Clerk Maxwell. In Hertz's 1887 experiment, he found that these waves would transmit through different types of materials. It would also reflect off metal surfaces in his lab, as well as conductors and dielectrics. The nature of these waves were similar to visible light, and their ability to be reflected, refracted, and polarized would be shown by Hertz in subsequent experiments by other physicists. One thing also that is kind of funny, I remember discovering, a lot of people looked at the technology and our so-called radar absorbent planes.
Uh-huh.
Well, actually, it's kind of funny because in World War II, we had planes that were undetectable by radar. They were made out of wood.
Ooh.
Yeah, and it really, people were like, how did you get past our radar? We didn't see you. Well, I'm in that plywood box over there.
I floated by.
Surprise! And yeah, and it was kind of brilliant on some of those night fighters because the Germans had their their version of radars along the coast, and we had the British had mosquitoes. We had a couple different types that we would use. Of course, one of our advantages is that we have some fighters that were just brutal, like the Lightnings, the P-38s. They could just come through there, and they had those cannons. And trains didn't operate very well when they're full of holes for some reason.
What?
I don't know why.
Huh.
Of course, on the exact opposite end of the scale, they had the one plane that was known as the Thunderbolt, and it was such a weird-looking plane because it had this great big huge engine, but it had cannons, and again, tear up tanks, tear up engines, tear up the locomotives. Is that a train full of ammunition? Not anymore. Next fellow that we had was a fellow named Guillermo Marconi, a radio pioneer. And he noticed that radio waves were being reflected back to the transmitter by objects in radio beacon experiments he was conducting on March 3rd, 1899 on Salisbury Plain. Well, in 1916, he and British engineer Charles Samuel Franklin used short waves in their experiments critical to the practical development of radar. He would relate his findings 6 years later in a 1922 paper delivered before the Institution of Electrical Engineers in London, writing, "I also described tests carried out in transmitting a beam of reflected waves across country, and pointed out the possibility of the ability to such a system if applied to a lighthouse and lightships, so as to enable vessels in foggy weather to locate dangerous points around the coasts. It now seems to me that it should be possible to design apparatus by means of which a ship could radiate or project a divergent beam of these rays in any desired direction, which rays, if coming across a metallic object, such as another steamer or ship, would be reflected back to the receiver, screening them from the local transmitter of a sending ship, and thereby immediately reveal the presence and bearing of the other ship in fog or thick weather. That way you're not going to have two steamers run into each other, heaven forbid." Now, in 1904, another fellow named Christian Huesmeyer gave public demonstrations in Germany and the Netherlands of the use of radar echoes to detect ships so that collisions could be avoided. His device consisted of a simple spark gap used to generate a signal that was aimed using a dipole antenna with a cylindrical parabolic reflector. When the signals reflected from a ship was picked up by a similar antenna attached to the separate coherent receiver, a bell would sound.
Ooh.
During bad weather or fog, the device would be periodically spun to check for nearby ships. The apparatus detected the presence of ships up to 3 kilometers, or 1.6 meters, I should say, and Huesmeyer planned to extend the capability to 10 kilometers. It did not provide range, distance information, only warning of the nearby object. He patented the device called the, I'm trying to get this all in one spiel,
How dare you?
telemobile scope, but due to the lack of interest by naval authorities, the invention was not put into production. Holzmeier also received patent amendment for estimating the range to the ship. Using a vertical scan of the horizon with the telemobile scope mounted on a tower, the operator would find the angle at which the return was most intense and deduce by simple triangulation the approximate distance. Heaven forbid, something they could use algebra for. Now they use computers.
Darn. They had it used for algebra, then they got rid of it. I don't need to learn algebra anymore.
Nope. This is the contrast to the later development of pulsed radar, which determines distance via two-way transit time of the pulse. Now, Germany had a radar-based device for remotely indicating the presence of ships, was built in Germany by Christian Holzmeier in 1904, and has been recognized by the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers as the invention of the first working radar system by the inauguration of an EEE historic milestone in October of 2019. Now, over the following 3 decades in Germany, a number of radio-based detection systems were developed, but none were pulsed radars. This situation changed before World War II, and develops in 3 leading industries are described. Now, JEMMA, in the early 1930s, physicist Rudolf Kuhnhold, scientific director of the Kriegsmarine, the German Navy, and the NVA, Experimental Institute of Communication Systems in Kiel, was attempting to improve on the acoustical methods of underwater detection of ships. He concluded that the desired accuracy in measuring distance to targets could be attained only by using pulsed electromagnetic waves. Sounds like they're trying to build sonar.
How dare they?
Now, during 1933, Kuhnhold first attempted to test this concept with a transmitting and receiving set that operated at the microwave region of 13.5 centimeters or 2.22 gigahertz. The transmitter used a Bankhausen-Kurz tube, the first microwave generator, that produced only 0.1 watt. Unsuccessful with this, he asked for assistance from Paul Gunther Urbisch and Hans Karl von Willison, amateur radio operators who were developing a VHF system for communications. They enthusiastically agreed, and on January 1934, formed a company known as JEMMA, the Gesellschaft für Elektrotechnik and Mechanische Apparatur, for the effort. From the start, the firm was always simply called JEMMA. While work began in earnest in JEMMA, Hans Holden and Theodor Schultes, both affiliated with the prestigious Heinrich Hertz Institute in Berlin, were added as consultants. The first apparatus used a split anode magnetron purchased from Philips in the Netherlands. This provided about 70 watts at 50 centimeters or 600 megahertz, but suffered from frequency instability. Holman built a Barkhausen-Kurz tube regenerative receiver connected to Schultes' dipole antenna array, while von Wilson used a 48 centimeter transmitter, first connected to a Yagi antenna and then a parabolic antenna at 13.5 centimeters and 48 centimeters. In June of 1934, a large steamer was detected by the Doppler beat interference at a distance of about 2 kilometers with the 48 centimeter equipment and 4 kilometers with the 13.5 centimeter equipment. In October, strong reflections were observed from an aircraft which happened to fly through the continuous wave beam, yet keeping the transmitted signal out of the receiver continued to be a problem. Kuhnhold then shifted the gamma work to a pulse modulated system. A new 52 centimeter or 600 megahertz Philips magnetron with better frequency stability was used. It was modulated with a 2- pulses at 2,000 per second. The transmitting antenna had an array of 10 pairs of dipoles with a reflecting mesh. The broadband heterodyne receiver used acorn tubes from RCA, and the receiving antenna had 3 pairs of dipoles and incorporated iode switching. A bronze tube CRT was used for dispersing the range, or displaying the range. The equipment was first tested at an NVA site at the Lumiger Bay near Petzelhagen. During May 1935, it detected returns from woods across the bay at a range of 9.3 miles. It had limited success, however, in detecting the research ship Wolf only a short distance away. The receiver was then rebuilt, becoming a super regenerative set with 2 intermediate frequency stages. With the improved receiver, the system readily tracked vessels up to 5 miles out. In September of 1935, a demonstration was given to the Commander-in-Chief of the Kriegsmarine. The system performance was excellent. The range was read off the bronze tube with a tolerance of 50 meters, less than 1% variance, and the iode switching allowed the directional accuracy of 0.1 degree. Although the apparatus was not put into production, JEMMA was funded to develop similar systems operating around 500 megahertz and 2.4 meters. These became the Systakt for the Kriegsmarine and the Freya for the Luftwaffe, German Air Force. Respectively, the Navy needed the shorter wavelengths for surface targets, while the Air Force needed the extended range with the longer wavelengths. The 50-centimeter magnetron was replaced with the JEMMA TS1 triode, while the magnetron replaced the Barkhausen tube. Kudhold remained with the NVA, but also consulted with JEMMA. He is considered by many in Germany as the father of radar. During 1933 to 36, Holman wrote the first comprehensive treatise on microwaves, physics, and techniques, Der Ultrakrausen Wellen, Physics and Techniques of Ultra-Short Waves, in 1938 spring. And for our next fun name, Telefunken. In 1933, when Kleinhold at the NVA was first experimenting with microwaves, he had sought information from Telefunken on microwave tubes. Telefunken was the largest supplier of radio products in Germany. There, Wilhelm Rung had told him that no vacuum tubes were available for these frequencies. In fact, Rung was already experimenting with high-frequency transmitters and had Telefunken's tube department working on centimeter wavelength devices. In the summer of 1935, Rung, now director of Telefunken's Radio Research Laboratory, initiated an internally funded project in radio-based detection using Barkhausen's Kurtz tubes. A 90 centimeter or 600 megahertz receiver and a 0.5 watt transmitter was built. With the antennas placed on the flat ground some distance apart, Rung arranged for the aircraft to fly overhead, and he found that the receiver gave a strong Doppler beat interference signal. Rung, now with Hans Holman as a consultant, continued in developing a 1.8 meter or 170 megahertz system. Using pulse modulation, Wilhelm Stepp developed a transmitter-receiver device, a duplexer, for allowing a common antenna. Stepp also codenamed the system Darmstadt after his hometown, starting the practice in Telefunken of giving systems names of cities. The system, with only a few watts transmitter power, was first tested in February 1936, detecting an aircraft at about 3.1 meters distance. This led to the Luftwaffe to fund the development of a 600 megahertz gun-laying system, the Würzburg. Interesting enough, the Würzburg would also be a primary target. The British commandos would try to steal in an operation one day.
How dare they?
One night.
How rude.
Yes. Now, since the First World War, Standard Electric Lorentz had been the main supplier of communications equipment for the German military and was the main rival of Telefunken. In late 1935, when Lorentz found that Runge at Telefunken was doing research in radio-based detection equipment, they started a similar activity under Gottfried Müller. A pulse-modulated set called Einheit für Abwehrfunk, or DFA, device for detection, was built. It used a type DS310 tube similar to the Acorn, operating at 70 centimeters at 430 megahertz and about 1 kilohertz power. It had identical transmitting and receiving antennas made with rows of half-wavelength dipoles backed by a reflecting screen. In early 1936, initial experiments gave reflections from large buildings at up to about 4.3 miles. This power was doubled by using two tubes, and in mid-1936, the experiment was set up on cliffs near Kiel with good deflections of ships at 4.3 miles and aircraft at 2.5 miles northeast. Now, the success of these experiments was reported to the Kriegsmarine, but they showed no interest. They were already fully engaged with Gamma for similar equipment, also because of the extensive agreements between Lorentz and many foreign countries. The naval authorities had reservations concerning the company handling classified work. The DFA was then demonstrated to the Heer German Army, and they contracted with Lorentz for developing Kurfürst, or Elector, a system for supporting flak or anti-aircraft guns. Now, on the other side of the English Channel,
How dare they?
1915, Robert Watson Watt joined the meteorological office as a meteorologist working with an outstation at Aldershot in Hampshire. Over the next 20 years, he studied atmospheric phenomena and developed the use of radio signals generated by lightning strikes to map out the position of thunderstorms. This difficulty in pinpointing the direction of these fleeting signals using rotatable directional antennas led in 1923 to the use of oscilloscopes in order to display the signals. The operation eventually moved to the outskirts of Slough in Berkshire, and in 1927 formed the Radio Research Station, the RRS, Slough, an entity under the Department of Science and Industrial Research. Watson Watt was appointed to the RRS superintendent. The last name like Watt, you knew he was going to be electricity, right?
Right?
Shocking.
Very shocking.
In 1934, the Air Ministry established the Committee for a Scientific Survey of Air Defense with the goal of finding how far recent advances in scientific and technical knowledge could be used to strengthen the present methods of detection and defense against hostile aircraft. The Tizard Committee was named after its chair, Sir Henry Tizard. H.E. Wimpress, what a name, Director of Scientific Research at the Air Ministry and a member of the Tizard Committee, had read about the German newspaper article claiming that the Germans had built a death ray using radio signals accompanied by the image of a very large radio antenna. Both concerned and potentially excited by this possibility, but highly skeptical at the same time, Wimpress looked for an expert in the field of radio propagation who might be able to pass judgment on this concept. Watt, superintendent of the RSS, was now well established as an authority in the field of radio, and in January of 1935, Wimpress contacted him, asking if radio might be used for such a device. After discussing this with the scientific assistant, Arnold F. Skip Williams, or Wilkins, I should say, Wilkins quickly produced a back-of-the-envelope calculation that showed energy required would be enormous. Watt wrote back that this was unlikely, but added the following comment: attention is being turned to the still difficult but less unpromising problem of radio detection and numerical considerations on the method of detection by reflected radio waves will be submitted when required. Over the following weeks, Wilkins considered the radio detection problem. He outlined an approach and backed it with the detailed calculations of necessary transmitter power, reflection characteristics of an aircraft, and the needed receiver sensitivity. He proposed using a directional receiver based on Watt's lightning detection concept, listening for powerful signals from a separate transmitter. Timing, and thus distance measurements, would be accompanied by a triggering, the oscilloscope's trace with a muted signal from the transmitter, and then simply measuring the return against the scale. Watson Watt sent the information to the Air Ministry, and on February 12, 1935, in a secret report titled The Detection of Aircraft by Radio Methods. In 35, Arnold Wilkins set up a receiving equipment 6 miles from the BBC with a 49.8 meter shortwave transmitter and recorded the reflection of a passing Handley Page Hayford bomber passing between the two. Witnessed by Albert Rowe, the Air Ministry allocated research funds and classified the project highly secret. The equipment was later reproduced for Wilkins for the 1977 BBC television series The Secret War episode, To See 100 Miles. I actually watched that show. It's a really good show. Mm. Now, based on the pulse transmissions as using for probing the ionosphere, a primordial system was designed and built by the RRS by the team. Their existing transmitter had a peak power of about 1 kilowatt, and Watkins had estimated that 100 kilowatts would be needed. Edward George Bowen was added to the team in design and built a transmitter. Bowen's transmitter operated at 6 megahertz or 50 miles, had a pulse repetition rate of 25 hertz, a pulse width of 25, and approached the designed power. In 1935, testing began at the Orford Nest. 6 wooden towers were erected, 2 for screening the transmitting antenna, and 4 for corners for crossing receiving antennas. Now, on June 17th, the first target was detected, a Supermarine Scapa flying boat at 27 kilometers range. Watson Watt, Wilkins, and Bowen are generally credited with initiating what would later be called radar in the nation. In December of 1935, the British Treasury appropriated £60,000 for a 5-station system called the Chain Hole, covering approaches to the Thames estuary, and the Secretary of the Tizad Committee, Albert Percival Rowe, coined the acronym RDF as a cover for his work, meaning range and detection finding, but suggested the already well-known radio detection finding. Late in that year, responding to Lindemann's recognition over the need for night detection and interception gear, and realizing existing transmitters were too heavy for aircraft, Bowen proposed fitting only receivers, which would be called by static radar. Frederick Lindemann's proposals for infrared sensors and aerial mines would prove impractical. It would take Bowen's efforts, including the urging of Tizard, who became increasingly concerned about the need to see air-to-surface vessels radar and, through it, aircraft interception radar to fruition. By 1937, Bowen's term set their crude ASV radar, the world's first airborne set, to detect the home fleet in dismal weather. Only in spring of 1939, as a matter of great urgency, after the failure of the searchlight system Silhouette, did attention turn to using ASV for air-to-air interception. Demonstrated in June of 1939, got a warm reception from the Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, and even more so from Churchill. This proved problematic. The accuracy depended on the height of the aircraft, meant the CH, capable of only 6.4 kilometers, was not accurate enough to place an aircraft within the detection range. An additional system was required. Its wooden chassis had a disturbing tendency to catch fire, even if the attention from expert technicians, so much that Dowding, when told by Watson Watt could provide hundreds of sets, demanded 10 that work. The Kosser and Metrovic sets were overweight from aircraft use, and the RAF lacked night fighter pilots, observers, and suitable aircraft. Now, shortly after that, we had World War II start when Germany decided to invade Poland. And as they like to say, then it all started going crazy. In 1940, John Randall and Harry Boot developed cavity magnetron, which made 10-centimeter wavelength radar a reality, and to aid Chain-Home in making height calibrations, at Dowding's request, the electrical calculator type Q, commonly called the fruit machine, was introduced in 1940. The solution to night intercepts would be provided by Dr. W. B. Ben Lewis, who proposed a new, more accurate ground control display, the Planned Position Indicator, or PPI, a new ground-controlled interception GCI radar, and a reliable AI radar. The AI sets would ultimately be built by EMI. GCI was unquestionably delayed by Watson Watt's opposition to it, and is believed that the CH was sufficient, as well as Bowman's preference in using ASV for navigation, despite Bomber Command disclaiming the need for it, and Tizard's reliance on faulty silhouette system. But basically what they were all looking to do, and the British had a really good head start, because what they primarily were looking to do is, with radar, is that they wanted to see how high up the aircraft were,
right,
how wide of a span these aircraft were coming across in, and what their altitude was. And that way, if they could figure out, if this group coming across was, say, 50 planes, they would know what sort of defenses they would need to scramble. Would they need to bring up 2 whole air wings to defend London, or would they need to be able to stare out to other departments on where the fighters are coming from? Of course, the other problem that they had in some cases was that they also were trying to find a way to track exactly where these planes were going, and sometimes the Germans they love to shoot up the home system too. Heck with them catching on fire on their own. They didn't work very well when they were strafed by Messerschmitts for some reason. No.
Oh.
Now, in March of '36, the work at Offerness was moved to the Broadsea Manor nearby the mainland. Until the time, the work had officially still been under DSIR, but was now being transferred to the Air Ministry. At the new Broadsea Research Station, the Chain-Home equipment was assembled as a prototype. There were equipment problems when the Royal Air Force first exercised the prototype station in September of 1936. They were cleared by the next April, and the Air Ministry started plans for a larger network of stations. Initial hardware at the CH stations were as follows. The transmitter operated on 4 pre-selected frequencies between 20 and 55 megahertz, adjustable within 15 seconds, and delivered at peak power of 200 kilowatts. The pulse duration was adjustable between 5 and 25, with the repetition rate selectable at either 25 or 50 hertz. For synchronization of all transmitters, the pulse generator was locked to the 50 hertz by the British power grid. 4 360-foot steel towers supported transmitting antennas, and 4 250-foot wooden towers supported the cross-dipole arrays at 3 different levels. The goniometer was used to improve the directional accuracy from the multiple receiving antennas. By the summer of 1937, 20 CH stations were in check-out operation. A major RF exercise was performed before the end of the year and was such a success that 10 million pounds was appropriated by the Treasury for eventual full chain of coastal stations. At the start of 1938, the RAF took over control of all CH stations and the network began regular operations. In May of 1938, Rowe replaced Watson Watt as the superintendent by Bogsy. In addition to the work on CH and successor state systems, there was now major work in airborne RDF equipment. This was led by E.G. Bauman and centered on the 200 megahertz sets. This higher frequency allowed smaller antennas and appropriate for air installation. From the initiation of the RDF work at Oxfordness and the Air Ministry had kept the British Army and the Royal Navy generally informed, this led to both of these forces having their own RDF developments.
Whee!
But, yeah, on the date of history, make sure I get this completely right, because this was on the 2nd, one day after April Fool's Day.
That's a good day to do it.
Exactly.
Nobody would have believed it if they'd done it on April Fool's Day.
Oh, heck no.
You did a what? You invented a what?
We did wood? You're microwaving wood? But,
me.
little Wayback history piece, and we will see you guys. Sue will do it next week. But
I will do it. Never.
Never? Oh, no. Well, no, we're gonna pitch in with Angel.
Ooh, we have got to talk her into that.
Yes,
Because I know
we do.
she wants to do some.
I know.
Because there's been some she's told us, no, you cannot do that.
I know.
I want to do that. And then
She has to do it.
Then we ask her to do it, and she's like, no, I don't want it.
You know what we could always still do
What's
is have her do a special piece for her her friend Pedro Pascal's birthday.
Now, we tried to talk her into doing a few birthdays.
Yeah. But anyway, we will catch you folks next week. Have a good one, and we'll say hi from the snow.
Happy April Fool's Day, everybody.